Hi, Aqua Roomers. It's time for chapter reading. Little House on the Prairie. Oh my goodness. And if you remember, yesterday we talked about how there were so many Indians that kept going back and forth along the trail all the time. Well, Jack was cross, even with Laura. He was never let off the chain, and all the time he lay and he hated the Indians. Laura and Mary were quite used to seeing them now. Indians didn't surprise them at all, but they always felt safer near Jack or Pa. One day, they were helping Ma get dinner. Baby Carrie was playing on the floor in the sunshine, and suddenly the sunshine was gone. I do believe it's going to storm, Ma said, looking out of the window. Laura looked too, and great black clouds were billowing up in the south across the sun. Pet and Patty came running from the field, Pa holding to the heavy plow and bounding in long leaps behind it. "Prairie fire!" he shouted. "Get the tub full of water. Put sacks in it. Hurry!" Ma ran to the well. Laura ran to tug the tub to it. Pa tied Pet to the house. He brought the cow and the calf from the picket line and shut them in the stable. He caught Bunny and tied her fast to the north corner of the house. Ma was pulling up buckets of water as fast as she could. Laura ran to get the sacks that Pa had flung out of the stable. Pa was plowing, shouting at Pet and Patty to make them hurry. The sky was black now. The air was as dark as if the sun had set. Pa plowed a long furrow west of the house and south of the house and back again east of the house. Rabbits came bounding past him as if he wasn't there. So Pa has plowed a furrow was like a deep trench, this way and this way and this way around the house. And imagine bunnies just jumping everywhere. Pet and Patty came galloping, the plow and Pa bounding behind them. Pa tied them to the north corner of the house. The tub was full of water. Laura helped Ma push the sacks under the water to soak them. "I couldn't plow but one furrow. There isn't time," Pa said. "Hurry, Caroline. That fire's coming faster than a horse can run." A big rabbit bounded right over the tub while Pa and Ma were lifting it. Ma told Laura to stay at the house. Pa and Ma ran, staggering to the furrow with the tub. Laura stayed close to the house. She could see the red fire coming under the billows of smoke. More rabbits went leaping by. They paid no attention to Jack, and he didn't think about them. He stared at the red under the sides of the rolling smoke and shivered and whined while he crowded close to Laura. The wind was rising and wildly screaming. Thousands of birds flew before the fire. Thousands of rabbits were running. Pa was going along the furrow, setting fire to the grass on the other side of it. Ma followed with a wet sack, beating at the flames that tried to cross the furrow. The whole prairie was hopping with rabbits. Snakes rippled across the yard. Prairie hens ran silently, their necks outstretched and their wings spread. Birds screamed in the screaming wind. Wow. So look at this. All of the animals are just leaping and bounding by. There's Laura and Mary. Now I see, if you look carefully, see if I can get this for you. There is Pa's plow, and there are Ma and Pa dragging a bucket of water. And you see the long furrow, the big, like a trench that they dug? My goodness. But then he set a fire on the other side. We'll see what happens. Pa's little fire was all around the house now, and he helped Ma fight it with the wet sacks. The fire blew wildly, snatching at the grass inside the furrow. Pa and Ma thrashed at it with the sacks. When it got across the furrow, they stamped it with their feet. They ran back and forth in the smoke, fighting that fire. The prairie fire was roaring now, roaring louder and louder. In the screaming wind, great flames came roaring, flaring, and twisting high. Twists of flame broke loose and came down on the wind to blaze up in the grasses far ahead of the roaring wall of fire. A red light came from the rolling black clouds of smoke overhead. Mary and Laura stood against the house and held hands and trembled. Baby Carrie was in the house. Laura wanted to do something, but inside her head was a roaring and whirling like the fire. Her middle shook, and tears poured out of her stinging eyes. Her eyes and her nose and her throat stung with smoke. Jack howled. Bunny and Pet and Patty were jerking at the ropes and squealing horribly. The orange, yellow, terrible flames were coming faster than horses can run, and their quivering light danced over everything. Oh, my goodness. So look, Laura and Mary are with Jack against the house, and there are Ma and Pa with the wet sacks that they put into the tub, and they're just beating and stamping out any fire that comes close. Pretty scary. Pa's little fire had made a burned black strip. The little fire went backing slowly away against the wind. It went slowly crawling to meet the racing, ferocious big fire. And suddenly, the big fire swallowed the little one. The wind rose to a high, crackling, rushing shriek. Flames climbed into the crackling air. Fire was all around the house. Then, it was over. The fire went roaring past and away. Pa and Ma were beating out little fires here and there in the yard. When they were all out, Ma came to the house to wash her hands and face. She was all streaked with smoke and sweat, and she was trembling. She said there was nothing to worry about. The backfire saved us, she said. All's well that ends well. So this is so interesting. Pa dug the trench, the furrow, and on the houses on this side, on the other side, he set a fire. So the little fire burned and burned toward the big fire, and when the big fire met it, that was it. Swallowed the little fire, and it stopped the big fire. And that is called a backfire. Wow. The air smelled scorched. And to the very edge of the sky, the prairie was burned. Naked and black, threads of smoke rose from it. Ashes blew on the wind. Everything felt different and miserable. But Pa and Ma were cheerful because the fire was gone and it had not done any harm. Pa said that the fire had not missed them far, but a miss is as good as a mile. He asked Ma, if it had come while I was in Independence, what would you have done? We would have gone to the creek with the birds and the rabbits, of course, Ma said. All the wild things on the prairie had known what to do. They ran and flew and hopped and crawled as fast as they could go to the water that would keep them safe from fire. Only the little soft striped gophers had gone deep down, deep into their holes, and they were the first to come up and look around at the bare, smoking prairie. There are the gophers. The fire has passed, and now they're popping their head up. Then, out of the creek bottoms, the birds came flying over it, and a rabbit cautiously hopped and looked. It was a long, long time before the snakes crawled out of the bottoms, and the prairie hens came walking. The fire had gone out among the bluffs. It had never reached the creek bottoms or the Indian camps. That night, Mr. Edwards and Mr. Scott came to see Pa. They were worried because they thought that perhaps the Indians had started the fire. Oh, Pa didn't believe it. He said Indians had always Indians always burned the prairie to make green grass grow. That's pretty smart. And to make traveling easier. Their ponies couldn't gallop through the thick, tall, dead grass. Now the ground was clear, and he was glad of it because plowing would be easier. While they were talking, they could hear drums beating in the Indian camps, and Laura sat still as a mouse on the doorstep and listened to the talk and to the Indians. The stars hung low and large and quivering over the burned prairie, and the wind blew gently in Laura's hair. Mr. Edwards said there were too many Indians, and he didn't like it. And Mr. Scott said he didn't know why so many were coming together if they didn't mean anything but a jubilee. Oh, these are sad words that I'm going to read to you. And you have to remember, a long time ago, people didn't really understand that if somebody looks different or acts different, that they're still a good, kind person on the inside. And Mr. Scott said, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. He just doesn't know. He doesn't understand. Pa said he didn't know about that. He figured Indians would be as peaceable as anybody else if they were let alone, and that is right. On the other hand, they had been moved west so many times that naturally they didn't like the white folk. But an Indian ought to have sense enough to know if he was licked with soldiers at Fort Gibson and Fort Dodge. Pa didn't believe the Indians would cause any trouble. So, we'll read more tomorrow. What a prairie fire. Wow. How scary. I'm glad everything is okay. Till tomorrow, boys and girls. Bye.